Okay, so you get home from your mission, and then tell us about how your faith trajectory went, and what led to you kind of becoming a historian.
So I got home too late to start college. And I wouldn't have started college if it weren't for the church. The church wants you to be educated. And, my family certainly, didn't emphasize education. They were smart, clever people, but they didn't excel in school. Both of my parents dropped out of high school, really. Um, my sister never completed high school. I think she got her GED eventually. And my brother and I completed high school. Um, but I delayed it because I got home too late. And um, the next summer, my friend and I, Randy Moon, uh, we hopped in the car and drove to Salt Lake because we wanted to connect up with some of our old missionary companions. But while we were there, I decided, oh, let's go find the Tanners. It's where's that, ballpark? So I drove around Salt Lake going, where's the ballpark? and people would point, oh, go down here, make a left. So I found the ballpark, and then I drove around the ballpark until I saw the sign that Reverend Cuthbert mentioned. There was a sign, Modern Microfilm Company, So I went in, met Sandra. I met Sandra Tanner.
76?
Yeah. Well, 77.
Okay, 77.
Yeah.
All right.
77. I met Sandra in her little house, in the front room of her house, and our books. And I went around and I talked to her, probably annoyed her with my true believer, position. And I bought some of their stuff. And all the way home, I made my friend drive home while I read their stuff all the way home. and so then I started researching, and there's got to be answers to this. And I started trying to solve some of their puzzles. Eventually, I don't know how long it exactly took for me to graduate from that to actually wanting to get a hold of their sources. So I always wanted to go back. Okay, and somehow I got onto the first vision. And the Book of Abraham. The Book of Abraham really bothered me the most, probably because it was so right there in your face. Here's the documents, here's his fake translation, there you are. So then I was intrigued with the first vision and the revivals and things. And so I wanted to really talk to Wes Walters personally. And I started writing Wes.
Why Wes Walters?
Because he's the first vision guy. He's the guy that discovered that there were no revival or there wasn't a revival in Palmyra in 1820. That the revival that was happening, that Joe Smith described, fit perfectly with 1824-25, the winter of 1824-25. But I was trying to explain it away still. But I wanted to talk to him, and we started writing. And Wes wrote back and forth, and I was very impressed with his reasoning. And that some of the things I would learn from Milton Bachman. I read his book, and I read, I think it was published at this time, Richard Bushman's response to Wes. And there were other things that Wes wrote that also on money digging and the 1826 trial that, were documents that he discovered and were really important to understanding what was going on. And so I wanted to talk to him personally. And I did, and he had to cut off the back and forth that we were having because he was working on his master's thesis at the time, which dealt with the use of the Bible in the Book of Mormon. And so,
Wait, was this a church employee? Was this a BYU professor? Who is this?
oh yeah, sorry.
No. I don't.
Wes. Well, I just assume everybody's up with me, but Wes Walters was a Presbyterian minister that lived in Marissa, Illinois.
Oh,
And Wes, he got really intrigued with Mormon history. Of course, he's a Presbyterian minister, but he took on the subject. And what I liked about Wes was that he would actually get in his car and go out and dig in these archives all over the United States. You know, he'd go to historical societies or what do you call it? Jail houses, basements or attics of courthouses. You know, looking for original documents.
Von Brody did that, right? That's my understanding.
She might have done a little, but nothing like Wes. I don't think she discovered any. She did compile a lot of early newspaper kind of things.
Okay.
You know, before they were on microfilm, probably, and so you'd had to go to a lot of historical societies to see the newspapers. But her source was really Walker, was it? I forget.
Someone.
Anyway.
Okay.
But Wes looked at. He tried to find a revival in Palmyra, and couldn't find any in the records. You know, great multitudes were united to the different religious parties. He tried to find because there were lots of bragging about in the newspapers and especially church periodicals on how many converts they had in various towns. And he couldn't find any great multitudes uniting to the churches, within a reasonable distance of Palmyra at the time. So then Milton Bachman, he tried to, argue that the wording is, doesn't say that they were converted in Palmyra, it just says region of country or district of country. And
that would have been a church apologist.
Yeah, Milton Bachman, a BYU professor. And Milton Bachman and Richard Bushman tried to counter Walter's thesis by mostly arguing that it was in the region, not in Palmyra, because just the way the 1838 Joseph Smith's 1838 history, worded how it happened. So I was researching the first vision, and I was talking to Wes about it. I started having doubts. I was going to the university by this time also.
Of Utah?
No. No, it was a junior college, 2-year junior college, Golden West College in Huntington Beach, California.
Okay.
And then I transferred from there to Long Beach, California State University at Long Beach.
Got it.
But I was going to the university. I was doing research. I was writing letters back and forth
to
Wes, to other people. I eventually met, when Wes couldn't write anymore, I went and met Mike Marquardt, who is still my really close friend. And we regularly talk, weekly probably, on all sorts of things that both of us are working on. So Mike Marquardt he's a really good researcher. He hasn't gone to the university to learn history or anything, but he's an amazing researcher. everybody knows, anybody writing, working in this subject knows Mike Marquardt. And he has the most fantabulous memory. He remembers details and facts like nobody else that I really know, and knows right where things are and what they say, and a much better memory than I've got. But so I tap Mike on a regular basis, and I got involved with him mostly. We were talking about the Book of Abraham, and he had responded to Hugh Nibley, professor apologist Hugh Nibley, and he responded to Hugh Nibley's apologetic on the Book of Abraham, where Nibley's argument was, we don't have the actual document, the actual scrolls that Joseph Smith used to translate the Book of Abraham, that it's missing. And his line of argument was that Oliver Cowdery described scrolls as containing red and black ink, and there's no red ink on the Hor papyrus, on the Book of Breathings. And Mike responded in a little pamphlet where he pointed out that Oliver Cowdery is describing both the scroll that was assigned to Joseph, which is Ta Sheret Min Papyrus, Book of the Dead, has red and a small part in red and most in black, and the Book of Abraham, which is the Hor Papyrus, the Book of Breathings, and not that one should not expect for there to be red writing on the Book of Abraham, what Joseph Smith claimed was the Book of Abraham text. So it just totally blew Nibley's argument out of the water, and I was impressed by that. But I did write Nibley just to see if he had a response to Mike, and Nibley sent me back some thing he wrote on judging and prejudging the Book of Abraham, and he attacked D.J. Nelson, who was an amateur Egyptologist who claimed he had a doctorate when he didn't. So they said, oh, he doesn't have a doctorate degree, he lied. And so that did away with the D.J. Nelson. And I met D.J. Nelson, too, at some Christian gathering that my friends took me to. He was quite a character. He was an interesting guy. But nothing he said was particularly wrong about, in a preliminary way of understanding what the actual Egyptian said on the papyrus. And so anyway, that's how I met Mike, and we've been friends, fast friends ever since. And,
so by 77, 78, you're starting to question your testimony. You're getting more into history. You're going to college.
Yeah. College was another thing. I started taking philosophy, and what philosophy did, I was intrigued with philosophy, and there was a professor who was quite eccentric. He looked like Plato, or what you would imagine Plato to look like. Walked around in sandals, had a gray beard and glasses, and he had a unique way of bringing out people's assumptions, and he would draw on the board, and we would have these debates in the class. And what he did was to make me think more precisely, not to take mental shortcuts, which as a Mormon I was used to doing. And so that was a very good training. And I was a philosophy major for a while. And I switched over to American history, U.S. history, because that was more, I figured, I love writing. I love researching and writing. And you know, you don't write and publish very often in philosophy. So, so I really got intrigued with the history of ideas. And I'd always like to know where an idea started and how it developed over time to get to where we are. And those kinds of subjects attracted me. So I was, for the longest time, I was more into the history of ideas, which is like philosophy in a way. And, you know, that probably grew, affected my approach to early Mormon history.
At what point would you say there's two points I'm driving towards? At what point, what year would you say you would have lost your testimony? And at what point would you have, or what year would you have decided I'm going to be a historian and start doing original research? Follow whichever one takes us to the earliest year, and then the one that takes us to the later year. Does that make sense? Because those are two tracks I want to know. When did your testimony end? What year? And what year did you start deciding you were going to write Mormon history? Which happened first?
Well, I always wrote for myself or friends about Mormon history. I just had a natural urge to write and externalize. And writing a paper for myself, just for my own notes, was my way of focusing and keeping track of what I've discovered or learned. And you really don't learn until you write. I mean, I remember Wes used to say, reading makes a full man, writing makes a precise man. He used man, but person, woman, whoever. And so that I always liked to write. I wrote, kept notes. I was just, that was my habit ever since I was a kid, even as a believer. So I loved studying Mormon history as a believer. So when I became a non-believer, I didn't lose my love for studying Mormon history. I just had a different interpretation.
But you okay. So what year did you can you pinpoint a moment where you're just like, I don't believe this anymore?
Okay, well,
was
there is no moment.
Okay.
That's the easiest answer. You don't wake up one morning saying, oh, I don't believe. It's a process. And sometimes you don't believe it before you even know it. And so, like I said, I had these doubts, things weren't gelling, and because I didn't have this really huge emotional attachment to Mormonism, mostly because I didn't really get into it until I was 16. I probably went on a mission because it was a social thing. I believed, I was like my brother, really, inside. I believed it was the true church. It made the most sense to me, but it was the only thing I really knew. And so, you know how you go through life and there's awakenings at different stages, and where you wake up to something, and I had nothing but Mormon friends, really, also, and I didn't dare think anything else, and because that was all I knew. Those were my friends at the time. I didn't have anything else. So probably in the at Golden West College was about the time I stopped believing, and I'm on my second marriage, really.
Right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got married at the age of probably, I can't remember, 20, shortly after my mission, 22, 23, somewhere around there, to a Mormon girl. And she even expressed worries about me because I was studying controversial things. Don't worry, I'm just trying to answer these things, you know? And so part of what slowed me down probably was that. And I was going to church. I did get excommunicated because I was a
Wait, when was that?
I did get excommunicated at about that time.
Wait a minute. Back up. So what year were you excommunicated?
About that time. I don't remember exactly
75,
when.
76, 77?
Well,
After you were married?
the same time, because they probably, I can't tell you because I didn't go to the trial.
Okay, you didn't go.
I didn't go because I didn't want to participate.
How did your stake president find out you were...
Well, I was going to church. It was more of a social thing with my wife. And they pulled me into the office and I answered their questions. And that's all there was to that.
Why'd they pull you in the office?
Well, they knew because we asked them to marry us.
Okay, but why'd they know you were studying stuff, or what made...
No, I didn't get excommunicated for any intellectual or apostate thing. I'm sure it was morality issues.
Okay.
So, but I wasn't a believer.
Okay.
And I was single.
Okay, got it.
Okay. And going to the university, I met...
So you were excommunicated for premarital sex?
Yes, probably.
Okay.
I wasn't there.
Okay, got it.
I wasn't there.
Okay.
I didn't participate because I didn't believe in it.
Okay. All right, so do you know how long your marriage lasted?
1 year, just almost 1 year. Almost 1 year.
And it ended, why? I mean, whatever you want to share.
No, it just didn't, we weren't...
Was it religious, faith stuff, or?
We weren't compatible.
Okay.
It didn't work out. We were just two different people. It was a mistake to even begin with because I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
Until I was maybe 30 years old and had a year of therapy. So.
Okay.
So at any rate, as soon as I got divorced, that was it.
With?
The church.
Okay.
That was it with the church. So that was slowing me down. That's why I didn't say anything to my Mormon friends. I didn't say anything to anybody. I couldn't really verbalize it. I couldn't say it out loud.
What?
That I didn't believe it.
Oh, okay.
But after I got divorced, then I told my Mormon friends that I was hanging around with in the university and at the institute. I used to go to the institute even though I was going to the university and I wasn't really I wasn't a believer or a non-believer. I was in limbo land. I didn't have any feelings about it really.
Okay.
But I was still studying the history because it was very intriguing to me still. And trying to work out puzzles, what was really going on there, you know?
Right.
So, as soon as I told my Mormon friends, I remember my one male friend that I hung around with mostly said, we're probably not going to hang around you anymore.
Funny how that happens.
Yeah. So it was kind of messy, but there was no internet. There was no Mormons around me leaving. There's none of that. I was alone. There was nobody to tell me how to do it or what to do or how to go about it and I wasn't particularly, I was just feeling my way through life, stumbling, really.
Were you aware of Leonard Arrington, Michael Quinn, all of the Arrington years of church history, kind of in those late 70s, early 80s time period? Were you aware of any of that research going on?
I don't know. I can't tell you the dates, but I started going to the Mormon History Association, which was the first historical gathering I went with, it was Mike Marquardt invited me up to stay with him, and it was in Ogden, and I believe it was 82.
Had you been to Sunstone before that? Sunstone was started in the mid-70s.
No.
Okay.
I never heard of them.
So Mormon History Association was the first sort of Mormon scholarly thing that you attended.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and it was Mike invited me. I believe that's how I went. And I went, and I believe that's when I met Brent Metcalf. He was still a believer at the time. And we sat down and started discussing Mormon history. I had just published, actually, a paper in the Journal of Mormon, Journal of Pastoral Practice. Excuse me. Wes Walder's. It was a paper I wrote, and it was a response to Ed Ashmont in Sunstone. So I knew about Sunstone magazine, and it was a response to Ed Ashmont's essay in Sunstone that talked about, is the Book of Mormon a translation? And he was trying to argue that it was a very loose translation. And he was trying to explain why Joe Smith could make changes later, or that there were, most of the changes were grammatical, but there still are about 21 changes that are theological and, substantive. And
that was before Blake Ostler's theory.
Yeah.
Someone else was developing that.
Yeah, it was before Blake Ostler's expansionist theory. It was just what I would call a conceptual translation or loose translation theory, as opposed to a literal translation. And Joseph Smith in the Times and Seasons says it was a literal translation. But and then I went through the Joseph Smith claimed to the people around him when he was translating that he could see the actual words.
Yeah, we've all read that.
Yeah.
That he says, I saw a character appear, wrote it down, then it would disappear, and words would appear. I'd write them down, new words would appear. So that doesn't leave a lot of room for him injecting his own biases or culture into the text.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it was a visual. Even the Book of Mormon talked about you shall see the stone. It's a seer stone. You see in the stone the translation. And so I argued against him, and it was a paper I wrote, and I gathered up all of these descriptions. And Wes asked me if he could publish it. I didn't intend on it being published.
That was your first publication?
Yeah. So I go, oh, okay, I guess you can have it. And so he published it in the Journal of Pastoral Practice, and Brent had read it, and he wanted to talk to me about it and tell me how wrong I was. And
so he was being an apologist. Brett Metcalf was being an apologist. You knew Brett Metcalf as an apologist.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes. And Brent was totally brilliant. I thought he was very smart. And he was not an average Mormon, for sure. And so we became fast friends also, and kept up, we've talked on the phone a lot. Shortly after that, he started working in the security for the Temple Square, and he would call me late at night and talk to me because I was up late. I was I usually get up early now, but back then I used to stay up really late and research and write. That was my prime time. And Brent would call me, 2 a.m. and we'd talk about stuff. And so we've had this great friendship ever since. And I benefited from all my friends, by the way, all my friends.
Sure. Did you know Mark Hofmann when he was running around Salt Lake?
Well, since I didn't live in Salt Lake, I was not exposed to Mark Hofmann on a regular basis. I saw him at Sunstone when I went up there, and it was 85, right before the bombings. Mark annoyed me. I didn't like Mark.
Why?
He was too secretive. I don't like secretive people, sneaky people, and he was sneaky and secretive. Plus, I have a vivid memory of Mark in the Hotel Utah, where the Sunstone used to meet. And it was at the time when Mike Quinn was giving his paper on magic. I think it was this one or the next one. But I used to admire Mike Quinn a lot. And now he's a dear friend of mine. But I used to admire him. I was a lot younger, and he was older and a professor at BYU. And his research was amazing. And he just knew a lot. And he was very smart, and he's very quick. He's a very quick thinker. And he's a great human being. Everybody loves him. So, and I benefited from my friendship with him immensely also. So, it was, at this time though, they were honing in on Mark, the scholars. And it was at the time when Richard Anderson had a display in one of the rooms, and he talked about one of the letters, I think it was an Illinois letter that had a hand stamp. You know how a letter in the corner, back then they would stamp it with the stamp by hand. And sometimes the stamp wouldn't be straight. You would just get a sharp edge, and then it would fade out on the other side of the round stamp or oval stamp. And Richard Anderson had a blow-up of that, showing how it didn't look real. It looked like it was hand-drawn with these little dots. It was hand-drawn. And I can remember Mark looking at that real carefully, and people walking by looking at that. And still, they didn't put the finger exactly on Mark. And then there was, right before Marvin Hill was going to give his presentation on the Salamander letter. And even, I have to mention, Gerald Tanner was on to Mark first, probably, I don't know. But he was saying that there's something wrong with this letter. And I would get these photographs. Mine came via Wes Walters, actually. But I would get a photograph of the Salamander letter, and I would look at that and go, well, there's no crossouts. It's too perfect. But I didn't know enough to really say anything. But I would remark, it's like an artwork, piece of art. Look at this.
And so you were kind of onto him, as a potential sketchy guy.
Well, I didn't know it was Mark. Maybe he bought one that was not real.
Right. Right.
And that's the same thing Marvin Hill was saying. Marvin Hill was suggesting, well, maybe it's a 19th century forgery.
Right.
Nobody was actually questioning Mark for some reason.
Until later.
Yeah, he was not. I didn't question him until way later.
Right.
Okay. So, but Brent and I were talking, and Mark came up and said, "Oh, I need to talk to you, Brent." And they go off at a distance and whisper and talk. And I didn't like that. And I said, well, I don't have no one to talk to now, so I'm just going to follow Mark around. So I started following Mark around and watching what he's doing. And it ended up with Mark in the lobby of the Hotel Utah on his knees talking to Marvin Hill before Marvin Hill was going to give his presentation. And Mark is trying to probably talk him out of giving his presentation or changing his presentation. you know,
On the salamander letter.
on the provenance of the salamander letter. And so I'm standing there listening. Mark sees me, and then just then Brent happens to come up, and Mark more or less motions to Brent, take him away, you know. So Brent and I go off. Well, then Marvin Hill's session starts, and there's like Rick Grunder, Lynn Jacobs was there, and you know, we're all on this one row, and Mark's there, and Marvin Hill's giving his presentation, and Marvin Hill's talking about, he talked to the dealer that supposedly sold him the letter, and the dealer says, no way, you know. And so Marvin Hill goes, well, maybe it's a forgery from the 19th century, you know. Well, when it came to question and answer time, Mark stands up and starts trying to change things, you know, and defend the letter and change the story about the provenance, you know, which didn't really work very well with Marvin Hill, because, you know, Marvin Hill's kind of strong-minded. And so that's etched in my mind. And then I went home, back to California, and I heard about the bombings. You know, what is going on here? You know, we all thought it was some mad person, mad bomber type person that had an issue with the Mark's letters or something. You know, that the people that were funding Mark's researches. And but then when Mark's accident happened, and he accidentally blew himself up, I remember calling Rick Grunder that night, going, "What's going on, Rick? Do you know anything about what's going on?" And he didn't know. He was trying to find out too. And then even when they charged Mark, still I didn't know for sure that they were on the right track. But eventually, I remember going up the next year, and Mike Marquardt had the transcripts of his confession, and I read through all of those. I think it was like 3 volumes. I was going through it, learning things with the techniques and things that he was doing, and it was pretty clear. I mean, yeah, of course he confessed.
That's fun.
But I didn't really know Mark. He would never want to know anyone like me, really, probably. And I had no use. I don't care about actual documents. Photocopies are just fine with me. And I just want the information from the documents. I'm not a document collector or anything.
What year was your first major book published?
The Indian Origins.
Is that the first major book?
Yeah.
What year was that published?
86.
Okay, so this would have been a little bit after the Mark Hofmann stuff. And what was that book about? What was the point of that book?
Well, it started out, my research for it started out with some debate I was having with a friend. And we were debating about archaeology and geography, and somehow I got onto the Indian, that the mound builder myth, which is the white Indians were destroyed by the dark Indians.
Wait. Was that a myth prior to the Book of Mormon?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I probably read this a long time ago. I did not realize. I mean, unless in the view of the Hebrews, I guess there was a lighter and a darker civilization.
Yes, yeah.
But the mound builder myth, would that precede the view of the Hebrews?
Oh, yeah. It goes back to the Puritan times.
So this idea of a light and a dark-skinned Native American far precedes the Book of Mormon. It was in the air just like all the tens of thousands of other things that Joseph Smith probably got out of the ether. Okay, so the book's about that.
Well, it's like a major assumption. To the first readers of the Book of Mormon, it was invisible. I mean, it was an assumption of the time and place. It wasn't anything anybody would really debate.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I wanted to look up as much as I could find printed before 1830 about the Indians and what people believed about the Indians.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And so this is my introduction to really serious research before the internet. So I would spend hours and days on end going through microfilm. And there's it's called the Wing collection. It's everything printed in America before 1700. And the Shaw Schumacher series, which was everything printed from like 1800 to 1840s. And most universities have them, and they were on either microfilm or microtext, which were these cards that have books printed on these white cards, and you put them in special machines and you read them. And so I started trying to compile bibliography of everything I could find. And what did they believe about the Indian before the Book of Mormon was written, by Joseph Smith?